All right. Well, hey, welcome everybody to this edition of Cornversations. We'll do some introductions and then we'll just chat for the next, 3 to 4 minutes. And I'm kidding. As long as we go. So my name's Jim Schwartz. My role here at Beck is Director of Research Agronomy and our Practical Farm Research Program. With us today,
I'm Scott Dickey. I'm the Regional Agronomy Manager for Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri.
Adam Nelch here, Regional Product Specialist for Missouri and Eastern Kansas.
Very good. So we're going to have a conversation here for a while, talk a little bit about root reveal, silk reveal, see if there's any questions you have. But Scott, you were just talking, we've spent at Beck's a considerable amount of time talking about roots and root reveal. But one of the most important things in Kansas is stress tolerance, right?
Exactly. Yep.
So are roots the most important thing, or would you say there are other factors as it relates to stress tolerance that might be more important?
I tend to like to talk about flower timing and particularly silk timing of hybrids. You know, in the past, we used to talk a lot about early flowering hybrids. So if we had like a 110-day hybrid that flowered more like a 105, we usually felt like we were in a decent position to see a hybrid that might be able to handle stresses better. But I think what we've come to find out, what's even more important is silk timing. So when we talk about silking, we're worried about having the silks out earlier. You think about the components of a silk, it's over 90% water. And if we're in a stress situation where we don't have adequate water, we slow silk production down. So in a case where we silk later in a plant's life cycle, it's possible we may dump pollen prior to the silks being ready. And having this early silking, make sure we have silks available when the pollen's ready to be shed to pollinate.
Adam, we talk a lot about roots are not a selection criteria at Beck's. What about silks and this silk emergence? Is that something that you as a product team member, is that a selection criteria for you here in Kansas?
So for me, as far as the silk timing goes, I would say no, it's not a selection criteria. It's really more something that years of data and years of taking these flowering notes, we've realized there's some correlations there with that silk timing versus the pollen shed and ability to handle stress or not handle stress. So it's not really a selection criteria so much as it is, we're like, hey, okay, so we've got these, we call it negative ASI or silks first hybrids that are able to handle stress because you've got several examples of hybrids that don't work that way too. So pick the product that you want to put on your acre first and then think about silk timing. You know, we've got a couple examples like 5802, 6414, that are very good stress handling hybrids that are both neutral when it comes to silk timing. But you go back to the root reveal conversation, they're vertically rooted hybrids. And so that's where you kind of tie the two together and you're able to kind of see, you know, the pieces of the puzzle coming together on those type of products.
So I got a question for you, but before I do, so how do we get all that data about silk first, neutral, where's all that data come from?
As far as the silk data goes, myself, Regional Product Specialist, there's a team of 11 of us, RPSs we're called, as well as Craig Moore, our product lead, our corn lead. We go out every year. When pollination starts, we go to our Beck's Choice trials, our local trials, local to us and our given territories. We spend about a 10-day to 2 weeks of time going out every other day, looking at the silk timing on each hybrid and that pollen shed. We record 50% pollen shed, 50% silks out and ready to receive pollen. And like I say, that's about a 10-day to 2 week process, collecting those data points. That's something that companies do in research so farther back in their testing pipeline. But most companies like us, I think we're the only company that has guys looking at actual commercial hybrids and recording that information. So that's where that data is coming from.
Yeah, I've had our partners from Syngenta, Bayer, and Corteva all tell us that no company that they know of takes the degree of notes that our product team does when it comes to flowering. Scott, Adam mentioned vertical roots, and maybe that it's not just silk, but under stress, vertical roots in combination with a silk first hybrid might be a great way to help battle stress. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, we know that root architecture has an important component or important play in how a hybrid is going to be able to tolerate stress. You know, we have vertical, balanced, and horizontal rooting. And typically what we find is the vertical roots are better able to explore soils, to find water, go deeper and scavenge for water when we're finding it hard to find the water. But if you can tie vertical rooting with silk first, you're probably looking at best of both worlds for a hybrid's ability to tolerate stress. The other thing I think is interesting is you can take a hybrid that's a horizontal rooted or balanced rooted hybrid, and as long as it has a negative ASI or a silk first characteristic to it, you can take those hybrids that we wouldn't normally expect to be able to perform well and make them work pretty well in a stress environment.
So Adam, when I was up on the stage today talking about populations, I'm showing 28, 34, 40,000. We're in Kansas, right? It's a different environment out here. So when we talk about population management, is it as important as it relates to a horizontal or vertical? Or when we get down to that 22 or 24 or whatever, is it less important from your experience, root architecture and population management?
Yeah, so at those really low populations, we're in the middle of Kansas here today. So like Jim alluded to there, we're talking to people from western Kansas, 18,000, 16,000 population in some areas out there, dry land. And so those low populations and the root architecture, you spread plants out, you give them more room to operate. That's where that horizontal root architecture becomes less of an issue in that type of environment. So that I'd say less so with the root architecture and those low populations, tougher environments. That's where you look more at the silk reveal aspect of it and just the overall ability of that hybrid to handle the stress and the drought stress thing.
I want to add to that a little bit. You think about that western environment where on dry land we're at very low populations, but where we go to the high pops, we're irrigated. So again, it starts to change the way you think of hybrids. Would a horizontal work better in an environment where you're spoon feeding water and fertility to a plant? Maybe so, but maybe we should drop the pop a little bit so we have a little less interplant competition going on. So that's one thing that we've talked a lot about with our agronomists in the West is we need to make sure we're putting out learn trials and different testing opportunities for us to be able to evaluate exactly how these hybrids respond to those different managements.
All right, you just said where I was going to go. You said the word learn trial. What's a learn trial and why are they important for Beck's and for our customers moving forward?
So when we look at learn trials, the acronym stands for Local Evaluation and Research Network. So basically the way I look at a learn trial is I position it with our guys as a local product characterization test where instead of taking hybrids and planting them in strips and trying to find which one yielded the most or the least in a particular location, what we're trying to do is manage the hybrids differently. So we may plant a hybrid at multiple populations within this trial, or we may plant a strip, treat the front half or the back half with a fungicide. It's basically a way for us to take local needed information that we need and put them in a trial to evaluate the hybrids to see how they are going to respond to those different types of management. And so those are going to become more important for us as we include our PCR trials and then combining that with our choice trials to be able to help us provide our dealers with better information to better position hybrids on different acres.
So Adam, we just talked about PCR and learn, and then he mentioned choice. Where do you go to get your observations and your information, and why is that trialing network so unique and so helpful to you to make better product selections around things like silk reveal and root reveal?
Yeah, so my primary source for the information that I collect would be the choice plots out of those three. So guys like myself, like I say, there's a team of 11 of us. We basically live in those choice plots throughout the growing season. We're out there most days, more days than not, collecting various information. We're rating diseases. We're looking at the silk reveal type stuff. We're looking at, lodging and just all the characteristics to try and determine the ins and outs of all the products, as well as future products. So that what we call the experimentals, the hybrids that we're testing to potentially commercialize down the road, that's where we're gathering the bulk of our information for that selection process.
And those are pretty unique to Beck's because my understanding is you have all kinds of competitors in these trials. It's not just Beck's products you're looking at. You're looking at competitors as well, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So the way it's set up, they're replicated 2 times. So there's each hybrid's planted 2 times at each one of these locations. They're 4 rows wide by 40 feet long. We've got a 2.5-foot alley in between. That's for harvestability purposes and try to minimize, effects of neighbor hybrids. And so, yeah, we've got our commercial lineup, different sets of all those in each one of these choice trials. We've got competitor products out there and then all those experimentals that I alluded to a minute ago. So we're really able to look at the whole industry landscape of genetics out there in these choice trials.
Are those super secret locations, or can a customer or who can go through those?
No, they're not secret at all. We actually encourage people to go out to those. We do plot safaris and what we call choice walks. So we encourage farmers to come out, walk with us, myself, Scott, and your ATL, your seed advisor, your agronomist. We'll have events at these choice plots throughout the season. Usually later on in the season is when we have a big event. We'll have you come out and walk through it with us, and you can look at the products and see all the ins and outs firsthand in those choice plots.
I think those trials are a great way for us to pull the curtain back and let everybody see how we advance products, how we make the determination of what are going to be those next great products for a given geography based on performance. They're uniform trials. They're side by side with competitors. They're side by side with existing commercial numbers. It's just a great way for us to start looking at what is the next generation of products that we're going to be utilizing on the farm.
Adam, so we talked about you walking choice trials, and we said that roots are not a selection criteria, but Kansas is unique. What are your selection criteria when you look at corn and then also beans as you're walking those trials over and over and over again? What are the things you're looking for to make sure our growers have the best products available?
Yeah, so with corn, I guess one thing that I would say that Scott mentioned earlier, flower timing in a lot of the region I cover is drought prone. We like to see stuff that flowers early. In Southeast Kansas, really depending on where you're at, Kansas is a diverse state, so we've got a lot of different things we look at. But, Northeast Kansas, we're looking at standability, ability to stand up in those soils. Southeast Kansas, that flower timing, the ability to handle drought stress, hot nights, the heat tolerance is a big one when it comes to corn as well. So several of those things. Back to Northeast, tar spot tolerance, disease tolerance. So there's just a lot of different things we're looking at on corn. On soybeans, the southern half of my territory, eastern Kansas, we're looking at height. Guys in that region like to have taller beans because we get a lot of heat. And we get a lot of things that limit the growth of those beans. We want to see taller beans because generally standability is not much of an issue in that region. Then Northeast Kansas, we're more like looking at standability and wanting to see disease tolerance. SDS, sudden death syndrome, that type of thing is a bigger one with beans in the northeast part of the state.
It's interesting. You didn't specifically say yield, but yield is also, right?
Yeah.
But yield is kind of a subset of a lot of those factors out here in Kansas, right? So, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, yeah, that's right. That's kind of the whole thing. As long as we can check those boxes and find the criteria that fit Kansas, ultimately at the end of the day, you want to have that yield too. So as long as you've got the good agronomics to support and the characteristics to support it, then you get that final yield.
I think it's interesting when we think about our rep trials, soybean advancement, as long as these guys can bring us products that are performing fairly well, I think it's also part of the sales team, the agronomists, and our jobs to fine tune the placement of those products to get the most out of them. So if we get a good, nice fleet of new products out there, then we can start kicking the tires with them, putting them in different environments, and then learning how to position them even better locally in those, I'll call them nuts and bolts environments that make up where we're selling our products. And so it's a continuous progress of breeders to delivering products for our product specialists to look at, and then the sales teams to fine tune where we position them to get the most out of them.
All right, I'm going to go off the board a little bit, but as I travel, one of the questions I always get is, what does the crop look like where you're at? So you cover, what's your geography?
So Missouri and eastern Kansas.
What's your geography?
Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri.
What does the crop look like? Give me an evaluation of the crop in the area that you cover, Adam.
So where I live over in Missouri, things look pretty good in general. We've had abundant rainfall this year, especially in the eastern half of the state. Western half of the state, things are looking really good too. We've got kind of an oddity this year. We've got some white mold coming into northwest Missouri. So it's been a wet year when you're seeing white mold in northern Missouri. So that's happening. We're seeing some SDS in beans, also indicative of a lot of rain. Tar spots coming in and that type of thing across Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska. So all these storms have been having of bringing in disease. But in general, the crop looks pretty darn good most places I go. That southeast corner in southwest Missouri, southeast Kansas had too much rainfall for a lot of the early part of the season too. So,
Scott, what about your area? And also, are people spraying for tar spot yet? What are you finding?
So we have a lot of variability within the big geography that I cover. Some areas have been droughty. Then some of those drought areas have picked up rain. For example, where I live, we went quite a while without even needing to mow our yards. We were so dry, but then 2 weeks ago, we got 6 inches of rain. And even though we've been dry, yields look very good in that local geography where I live in. We have corn right by where I live that's already to half milk line. And here we are on the first few days of August. So the crop's moving along very rapidly. Looks pretty good overall. You get into Nebraska, we have a lot of variability there as well. We've had a few green snap events, probably not a severe year, I wouldn't say. But again, wetter than normal in parts of that geography, but in other areas that have been droughty. Kansas is kind of the same boat. A lot of rain in places and not in others. But overall, I think the average is pretty good overall.
So Scott, I'm going to stay with you and then go to Adam. 3 or 4 weeks ago, we started hearing about this phenomenon called tassel wrap. All right. What have you observed? What's the impact? How should we react moving forward? So what have you observed? What's the impact? How should we react moving forward?
So what we started noticing around somewhere around the 1st of July is we had a few fields where we were finding the flag leaf, the tassel leaf wrapped around the tassel on fields that were showing silks already. And what we tended to find, it was in hybrids that tend to demonstrate rapid growth syndrome. They have a tighter whorl. They want to stay wrapped. But the other key factor in this situation were hybrids that had a negative ASI or silk first. So what we were running into is silks were emerging from ears. The wrapping of the plants lasted long enough that in some cases pollen shed was occurring inside that wrapped tassel. You could open the tassel leaf up and pollen would fall out, but it was causing us to have sometimes misses on the butt end of the ear with pollination. But in a lot of cases, what we were seeing is uneven pollination. We would have kernels pollinated that were yellow, starting to move into milk stage, while some of the neighbor kernels were just at blister. And what we have found in the last couple of weeks is those ears have tended to even up. Things look pretty good there. So in general, the majority of the issues are solving themselves for the most part, but we have a few hybrids or a few fields where we did in fact miss pollination totally on the bottom half of the ears, and those will have a few where yields will take an impact. I forget what else you asked me about that.
How do we react moving forward?
So when I look at, well, we're all creatures of the internet anymore, and in a lot of cases, I think the internet has made this to be a huge problem, Corn Belt wide. Now I know we have areas and we have certain customers, we have certain growers within the Midwest that are going to have problems, but I don't think the concern is quite as massive as it's being made out to be on the internet. So I think people need to be calm, but they should be walking their fields so that they're prepared to what may or may not be out there. I know that locally where we've had our concern, I would be focusing on fields that have early silk hybrids that were planted very early, tend to be late March to the first week or so of April. Outside of that planting window in the geography that I'm most familiar with, we tend to be okay. Now, I don't know in Illinois, we have other locations where we've had the same concern, and I don't yet know their agronomic, the details on those particular fields.
Adam, as you evaluate products, that's your major driver moving forward. If you saw a hybrid at tassel wrapped, would you automatically throw it out of the system?
No, short answer, no.
Tell me why.
So, in my role, we're out there taking these silk and pollination notes every year. We see hybrids that do tend to have tighter wrapped tassels. And in a lot of cases, those tend to be some of our better performing products in certain geographies. And so we definitely want to continue to use those products. This environmental phenomenon that we're seeing this year is not something we're going to deal with every year, I wouldn't say. And so I just wouldn't just start crossing things off the list just because of seeing the tassel wrap issues we've seen this year. To kind of say what Scott said there a little bit too, there has been some mispollination in places. I think the bigger issue that we're going to see there is with the butt end of the ear not pollinating, you can get less development, you can get weaker shanks, and you have potential for ear slip. So timely harvest is going to be critical if you had that happen in your field potentially.
I think another key thing to add is it doesn't matter what the hybrid is, where it came from. Where we've seen tassel wrap, the majority of these hybrids we've had for multiple years and never seen an issue with them. So you have to really think about what condition triggered it, and are we going to be able to control that in the future? Will we see it again? Yeah, someday we will see it again. This is the first year in my career of 26 years that I've seen tassel wrap to this level. So it's not like it's a common issue. Jim, you've been around a while too, and I don't know how many times have you run into this?
Never run into it that it's been an agronomic issue. But the product team has made recordings of this before, right? It's not that they've never seen it. It's just it's never been an agronomic issue, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I'll tell you from my experience, some of those negative ASI hybrids, when we get slow growing conditions, usually it's nice weather. It's cooler than normal. GDUs might be a little bit behind. There's usually a lot of water. And so those negative ASIs might shift a little bit more negative, but you've got really good growing conditions where the silks and the pollen stay viable for a long time. And so generally it's not an issue, but whatever happened this year, whether it was rapid growth that really wrapped the tassel up tight or whatever it was, it's just a kind of a one-off type thing this year, I would say.
All right, I'm just going to double check, see if anybody has a question. Yeah, you're going to have to hear him because I won't be able to hear. How long can a silk be out before it needs to be pollinated?
You know, I think there's a lot of conditions behind that, but you think about a field, typically you've got about a week for pollination to occur in. And the longer it takes for that silk to be pollinated, the longer it will continue to grow. So to me, one of the bigger concerns we can run into in some of those situations is when the silks get extra long and they start to cover their neighbors. And that's what causes us to have some misses because they're just shading the rest of the silks from pollen shed. But I figure a week, if you don't have it done by then, you might start running into a few concerns.
I'll give you an answer to it. It depends, the agronomist answer, because the hotter the temperature, the less long you're going to have with viable silks. I read a statistic recently that you have about 5 days of good viability, and then you start to see a decline after day 5 in the viable silks.
And I agree 100%, and that it's more a lot of these pollination issues. These silks are getting balled up, bundled, and they're just physically not catching pollen. But in some cases now, because it's also so long, then they begin to desiccate out. But yeah, it's a good question. Yep. Anything else before I ask the last question of the day? All right, here it is. It's a question everybody always asks. Is this a 187 bushel crop globally, nationally? Is it really that big of a crop, corn and beans? What do you think?
I mean, in general, things look, pretty good. Even with the issue we just discussed, I mean, I think there's a big crop out there. I really do. My gut feeling, I don't know if I could put a number on it personally, but it feels like a tremendous crop year.
I'm not good enough to help dictate the market, but it looks like a pretty darn good crop to me on average. We do have issues here and there, but I think on average, things look really pretty good.
Yeah, I'm typically a pessimist when it comes to the crop. I'm not this year. I tend to always criticize their yield estimates. It's a good crop. I don't know if it'll end up being what it is, but it's a good crop.
We're not at the finish line yet, so.
That's right.
We have that component of it, but what I am, and I guess you get biased by where you live, but it's amazing. Even in the wet areas, you do see lack of uniformity where it was excessively wet. But in areas where it was even moderately wet to dry, the uniformity is unreal because in some cases we planted into some really, really good conditions.
I will say this, a gentleman who used to be he was in charge of estimating the crop for Cargill. It's a very important job. I asked him one time, I said, all things being equal, what's the most important factor for estimating corn yield? And he goes, that's easy. It's nighttime temperatures during grain fill. So we have a ways to go yet, and nighttime temperature can take a lot out because that corn plant has to respire to keep cool. So nighttime temperatures can still impact corn yield dramatically. So there's a lot to be decided yet on this final number.
There's one more thing we were just kind of talking about is the smoke, the impact on smoke on some of these later pollinating fields. I've been seeing a lot of pictures floating around of some pretty significant noseback. And I think part of that is due to the heat we had a week or two ago, 3 weeks ago. But some of it, I believe, can be tied to the smoke and the loss of photosynthate. As we've had more of a northern environment the last week or so, cooler weather, the smoke rolled back in from Canada. And that really has an impact on the light quality and quantity hitting those leaves and can result in some abortion, especially in fields that are closer to blister stage. Once you color up the kernels and they get into the milk stage and later, your abortion falls off in those situations. But the later planted fields that are in blister can still be susceptible to abortion due to lack of sunlight.
Yeah, I mean, and you can see the haze in the morning. I was talking to a guy this morning about how hazy it's been, and some of that's that smoke. So, and it can go pretty quick too. You think you've got a good fully pollinated ear, and then it can just flip pretty quick and see that tip back.
Okay, we've emptied our brains. There's nothing left in here. So thank you all for coming and joining us today. Thank you. Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.